I have a very flickery, weird screen. You?
Bianca, are you seeing what we're seeing?
Yeah, I think so.
So instead of seeing the
I can see
slide,
the slide, the PowerPoint presentation. You can't see that right now?
we're seeing the PowerPoint presentation on the bottom, and then we're seeing a flickering screen with probably your desktop.
That's odd. Okay, 1 second. How's that?
Nope, no different.
Okay. That's I'm sharing the desktop screen, so that's the that's what I have to share. I can't change the flicker. Let me come over and see. 1 second.
Okay. And those of you who have joined us who are listening, please stand by. Technical difficulties beyond our control and all that. Should we use my slide deck? Please stand by if you're just joining us. We have a little technical problem we're trying to sort out here. Still doing the same thing, Bianca. Okay. Stand by. We're going to try something different here.
Is that better?
Nope, still doing the same thing.
Okay.
All right, so I'll be advancing the slides. Sorry, everybody. Zoom was so promising. All right, do you want to share my screen? Okay. Everybody sees that?
Looks great.
Okay. So stand by, everyone. Thanks for your patience. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. This is Bill Maddox at the Carsey School of Public Policy in Durham, New Hampshire, with another in our series of SMDP webinars. This is part of a series with Plan International that we're doing this year. Our series is called Savings Groups and Beyond, Inclusion, Equity, and Transformation. And today, we are really excited to be presenting Giving It All Away, the full empowerment model of training savings groups. We have with us today two of the sages of the savings group field, Paul Rippey, Savings Revolution, whose logo you see up in the screen, and John Schiller, who is the international advisor for Plan International, and who has been kind of a co-host during this webinar series and will continue to be. Today we're going to get into a really interesting area of discussion, and when I say discussion, I really am encouraging you who are listening to join us after we have a short presentation by me and then kind of a living room discussion where John and Paul will discuss some of the issues. We're then going to ask you to join us either by typing in your questions in the question box, or ideally, if you have a microphone connected to your computer, we would like you to join us and be part of the process of delving into what I think is going to be a really, really interesting series. Sorry about that. Series of questions and discussion about where we think savings groups should go after they're formed and are strong and are ready to move into their own position in the world. So what I want to do is start today, before we get into the details, of finding out who's here. So we're going to pop up the first poll. And so when you see the polling tool, please answer. We'll give you just about 30 seconds to answer. And just so we know who's out there, let us know if you're an academic, a consultant, a management staff person, field staff person, a donor, funder, or other. So please self-identify where you kind of fit into that continuum. And we'll let that run for a few more seconds. All right, let's see if we have our poll results. And that should pop up on the screen. Uh-oh. We
Bill,
don't see the,
can you see the poll results?
I cannot see the poll results.
Okay, I'd be happy to read them to you.
Okay.
So management staff was 42% of our audience, 17% answered consultant, 17% said field staff, 17% said donor or funder, and 8% said other.
Okay. I think the poll feature is probably tied to your computer, so that's why we don't see it. But great. So we have a kind of an interesting mix of people out there. So welcome, everybody. We decided to get into this discussion because over, I think, the past several years, the savings group field has really talked about how we can put into the hands of savings group members the tools to kind of continue on the process of building savings groups. We have always talked about these big goals of, 20 million or 30 million or something like that, but how would we get to that if it was all reliant on NGOs to do this? So since the 1990s, NGOs have been leading the formation of savings groups. Over time, the model of group formation has evolved and more control of the process has been transferred to local people. Initially, NGO staff recruited and formed savings groups. Finally, many organizations, later, in response to demand from members and increased outreach and control costs, to control costs, CARE, Oxfam, and others began identifying group members who showed a good mastery of procedures and a commitment to spreading the idea of savings groups and train them to form new groups. So we really started putting it in their own hands, as Jeff Ash would say with his book. In all programs, group members have wanted to share savings groups with other people. Everywhere, they continue to form and train new groups. Very often, new groups are approached by trainers who agree to train them for a fee or not. But in many locations, there are no trainers or no good ones, and groups form new ones themselves. So how widespread is this phenomena of groups going out there and forming their own savings groups in the communities that they live in or adjacent to them? In Kenya, the Quality of Delivery Study found that through a sample in 2014 of 463 group members chosen at random in a door-to-door survey, 53.1% of respondents said their groups were formed by the community. Many of those groups were later acquired by a trainer of CARE, CRS, or other projects, but 27% of the groups visited said they never had a trainer. So it's pretty amazing. More than 50% of all the groups were basically formed by the community. Groups formed without a trainer were often adequate, although we don't know how many have failed along the way. However, many members of self-formed groups were more likely to report certain problems like lost money in the group or forced to borrow or not confident in share-it-out method. So we obviously see an issue with a need for training. People get the methodology, they move forward with it, but they are not as adept at running successful groups as if they were trained. In Uganda, a study was conducted by an organization called DATU that confirmed basically what we've seen is that this large number of groups is formed by community. So over 4 years, for each group created by CARE and CRS, 2 new groups were formed, mainly through spontaneous replication with some assistance from community-based trainers. So in looking at these 19 villages across 7 districts with an equal amount of CARE and CRS groups, basically it was about 1.97 new groups popped out of every original group that was formed spontaneously or by essentially the group members. So this is really an interesting phenomena. We know this happens. We know this is kind of universal. It happens just about everywhere where savings groups have been organized. We know the kind of famous studies in Nepal and in Zanzibar where the projects were shut down, and then researchers came back several years later and found 3 or 4 times as many groups formed as originally were operating in the area. So we'd like to know from you, are you aware of your group members forming new groups without the help of a trainer? So we're going to pop up another poll here. And this is just a yes or no, so we won't have to worry about it coming on the screen. Bianca will give me the results, but please answer in your own savings group work. Are you aware of your group members forming new groups without the help of a trainer? Yes, no, and if you don't run groups, then of course a nay. So we'll give another couple of minutes. All right, hopefully everyone has had a chance to answer that question. And Bianca, what do we have as results?
Sure, Bill. So the results are 53% of our audience answered yes, 27% said no, and 33% said not applicable.
Okay. Well, so obviously for the vast majority of people that are out there doing savings group work, we're definitely seeing a large number of replicated groups. So we know that since self-replication is a well-known byproduct of savings group programming, what would it mean if we gave more power over to the groups? That's really the basis of what we want to accomplish in this webinar. This idea of giving it all away, the full empowerment model of training savings groups, looks at what are the implications of giving savings groups more power in forming and managing groups, and what can we do to support this phenomenon while ensuring the safety and sustainability of groups over time. We're interested in hearing from you, and we started that process early on by asking you, when you registered for the webinar, we asked you in one word to tell us what this one word response to what giving it all away means to you in your savings group work. So we created a word cloud, and I'm going to pop that up. This is you. You produced this by your contributions. If you don't know how a word cloud operates, the words that come up most frequently become larger, and the ones that are less frequently are smaller. So if we look at the kind of top 4 in answering the question, what does giving it all away mean to you? Empowerment is huge, as Bernie Sanders would say. Sustainability, commitment, and sharing show up, and a lot of other really important things like learning, change, graduation, equity. So it's pretty cool. I think the idea of us giving it away, if you think about kind of the way in which commercial microfinance and financial systems approach microfinance has operated over the years, it was really about attracting customers and keeping them, retaining that relationship. That was really important to keep people being able to come back for more and more products and being able to take out more and more loans. And in the savings group field, in our kind of outlook, we're really looking at something completely different, which is empowerment, which is pretty interesting. So because we want to open this up to others, we want this open up to you, I think we want to kick off the next phase of this webinar by bringing in John Schiller and Paul Rippey to kind of talk about some of the main things that they think about when we think about giving power over to the groups, and what kind of training we need, and what do we need to support this process. So at this point, I'd like to invite John and Paul to join us. And anyone listening, please join by asking questions in the question box. If you have a microphone, let us know if you're willing to answer or ask your question on mic. We're really interested in hearing about your experiences and what you're learning and the things that you're thinking about this topic. So welcome, John and Paul.
Thank you, Bill. And Paul, just to set the stage and to summarize some of the earlier points made by Bill, we start in the history of group formation by the fact that the model was for NGOs through projects to spearhead outreach through a paid professional staff consisting of field officers and supervisors. And this was a fairly tight system. We've all, or many of us, have benefited from manuals as the one that Hugh Allen wrote, where the emphasis was really on process and on following procedures and on quality. And this model, of course, enabled that to happen when there was good training of field officers and when there was good supervision by the field supervisory staff. But over time, of course, weaknesses were seen in this because it did limit outreach. And projects have devised ways or mechanisms to achieve greater scale while minimizing costs through such roles as community-based trainers, village agents, community volunteers, paid service providers, and franchisees, among others. These changes, in addition to furthering the sort of the outreach goals of the projects, really allowed for ongoing contact with the groups beyond the period of training, which meant that the groups and the projects retained contact. And this allowed groups to become even more adept at the procedures and to undertake other functions and become platforms for all sorts of other things in the general category of non-financial services. And this has become referred to over the years as Savings Groups Plus. So these community-based facilitators became more than just group creators and group monitors. They also became trainers and other things. The fact that you've got all of these community-based people who are out there doing this same kind of work, this has had the effect of embedding the savings group methodology in communities far beyond any impact that an individual project could have, because you've got large numbers of people who have been trained in the same things, doing very similar work, and in many cases gradually saturating communities with these groups. And in the cases where projects have undertaken a TOT approach, where they don't just train community-based trainers in the methodology, but actually try to transform them into better facilitators and trainers. To the extent that this happens, you've got a cadre of people out there who can facilitate a whole array of other sorts of trainings and message delivery and other activities. So it's a fairly powerful mechanism. And we've also found that projects that focus on particular demographics, like the youth demographic, or on other special populations, like people with disabilities, have been able to do the same thing with these populations. That is, they've been able to sort of broaden the profile of the community-based trainer, and by so doing have been able to reach more disadvantaged portions of the community. And we found that these perhaps more specialized trainers seem to have a better rapport with their peers and therefore can do the work effectively. So Paul, that sort of sets the stage for, I think, a couple of points that you wanted to make.
Yeah, exactly, John. Thanks. And I concur with everything you said. I think that's an accurate description of all the good work that's been done. When I say the good work, I mean the good work really of taking what we know, wrapping it up in cellophane so that we can give it to people and they can take it from there. Because if people are training themselves at the village level, that just seems innately more empowering than bringing in expensive people on motorcycles or cars to train groups. So that's great. And I still, I think that there's still one step we haven't taken. And because the INGOs and their NGO partners are still saying, okay, you are now a trainer, but you in the group, we haven't trained you to be a trainer, so we're not going to give you the manuals that you need in order to form groups yourselves. But what actually happens even if somebody is not a village agent or a CBT or a PSP or whatever we choose to call that, they're still out there forming groups. And there is this vast network, parallel network of group formation, by the way, which is not reported in the SAVIX at all. And I've looked in the SAVIX because there's a section in there for member formed groups. It's empty. Nobody reports on this, because care plan, whatever, CRS, or just don't seem to be interested in counting these groups. They're very hard to count, by the way, but there is just this spontaneous growth. And I think rather than ignore it, what's the next step, and maybe the last step in really giving it all away, is packaging training materials so that people are both empowered and encouraged to form their own groups. See, they're going to do it anyway. The Kenya study showed a quarter of the groups never had a trainer, village agent or anybody, just formed by members themselves. Since it's happening anyway, let's help people do a good job. And so just to sort of keep you up to date, I'm working with FSD Zambia and Hugh Allen to make training materials that will be very, very accessible to people using both a short manual in local languages for those who can read, as well as English, and videos in local languages. And the nice thing about videos is you can, as you know, you can make as many copies as you want with no loss in quality and so on. So we're going to give those to groups and say, go ahead. You're going to form other groups, use these videos, because this is the right way to train a group. And so I just find that very exciting. And I think once I said at the Savings Group conference in Lusaka that, to me, we sort of measure our success in terms of how many people we've trained. I said we should start measuring our success when we have no idea how many people are in savings groups, because the people are doing it all themselves. Seriously, if it could get away from us so that people are consistently training good groups, and for that they need the training materials, then that's when we can say we've really won. We have no idea what the people are doing, but we know they're out there doing a lot of stuff. So that's what, and I'm very curious what other people think about this. And because I do think that's the last thing, is just to give people training materials, say, hey, make as many copies of this as you want to, because these will help you do a good job. So, yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Paul. Kind of along the lines of making sure people are trained well, from the standpoint of program operation, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I guess it is, SEEP embarked on a process of designing some program quality guidelines for savings groups, and it was I think a challenging process to get to the 8 quality guidelines that they have now, but they're really, they're fairly comprehensive, and they look at a lot of the different issues around safety and protection of members, and things that, some of the issues that have come up in the past few minutes of discussion. But they really are designed for program operators from INGOs or others who are doing work to guide their work, not for members themselves, to actually guide their process of setting up savings groups. So in the discussions about this webinar and what we think giving it all away means, and putting the power in the hands of savings groups, we thought, well, maybe we should come up with some guidelines of our own that would be just maybe not guidelines, but guidance anyways for a few areas that we think are important for people to think about. So I want to delve into that for a minute here. Hopefully the technology will cooperate. So here's a guidance for group members forming new groups, and this is hopefully something we could communicate to group members that would be something that they would keep as in their toolbox, that some of the things that Paul was talking about. Number one, members who want to train another group should be sure their own group is working perfectly. If there's something that they share out, excuse me, sorry, my phone is ringing here. You probably can hear that. Sorry. There's a problem with live webinars. So I'm going to start all over again. Members who want to train another group should be sure that their own group is working perfectly. If there's something they haven't learned or fully internalized, i.e. they share out calculation procedures, they won't be able to teach that to someone else. So really having highly trained, highly capable savings group members that really know the process inside and out and have probably been through at least a couple of cycles is really key. Number two, if a member starts a group, they need to stay with them until they have learned all there is to learn. Don't ever half train a group and leave them to get on with it. Also, be available for refresher trainings, e.g. review procedures around share out calculation beyond the first cycle. So, I kind of equate this to, antibiotics. You should never half take your antibiotics. You should never half train a savings group. They really need to see the whole process, and you need to be there, particularly when they reach those points where there's an issue, there's a problem, so they can see from your experience as a savings group member who's been through these issues, how that problem was solved, or to work through it with them. Number three, be sure the savings group or the member has the manual and the videos to help train. They should read the manuals, watch the videos themselves until they're sure they know all the parts of the training. So, this is a new territory for us. This is kind of a new frontier of giving groups the training materials and having them using them. We know that they can do it. That people are dying to get access to these kinds of tools. They've asked for them in cases, but we really have to make sure that they understand how to use them, how well they work, and that we are also doing our own quality control testing, working with groups to see how these tools can be improved. That's really going to be key as we try this new way of doing things. Oh my God, another telephone is starting to ring here. It's amazing how many things start ringing when you're doing a webinar. Sorry. 4, know when the new group has started to master all elements in this methodology and when it's time to reduce one's trainer role. We are, not trying to create a situation where group members are going to be there and resident within the new groups they start. Obviously, they don't necessarily want to do that, and people need to, once they learn how to walk, they want to run, they want to be able to do things on their own. So, the trainer should bow out at the appropriate time. These are just, guidelines that we came up with in a very short amount of time. These are different than the quality guidelines that SEEP is using, which are really for program operators. But what are your ideas? What are the kinds of things that you would think about in terms of how you would guide group members who wanted to go out and start forming their own groups? I'm going to turn back to Paul and John. They're going to pose several questions. I'm going to hopefully show you these questions. So these are questions for you, and this is where we want this to be interactive, so we want you to come on mic if you're willing to do that. So please let us know that. Use the Q&A box. Just type in your question, or you can just type in, hey, Bill, I would like to come on mic, and tell us your name, and you can join this discussion. But here's some questions we're just going to kind of throw out there. Maybe before I throw out the questions, I want to see maybe if John or Paul have any comments they want to make before we do that.
Only one, Bill, and perhaps in the guidelines, you kind of alluded it to. You alluded to it in the last guideline, Occasionally, you'll find situations where community-based trainers, they kind of hang on too long. And this is especially true in cases where they're being paid for their services. And I guess a natural inclination on the part of many is to want to continue that relationship because it represents income. And there has to be, as Bill was saying, a cutoff point where the group begins to walk and then begins to run. And where the community-based trainer, or if it's not a community-based trainer, but someone in the community who has benefited from these videos and the simplified manual, knows when to depart and basically let the group do it on its own. That was just one comment I had.
Great.
Let me tag onto that quickly, and I think, if I may, that the economic entrepreneur, in other words, the person who's trying to start a business, tries to hold on to their market as much as possible. The social entrepreneur is always trying to give things away. So if I'm working on a social project in my village and I could find somebody else to do it, I say, great, you do that because I have a lot of social needs that I need to address. So if you'll take care of education, I want to move on to clean water. Or if you do, I was doing savings groups. If you can do savings groups, then I can take on better agricultural processes. I mean, the social entrepreneur, the mentality is give things away because the market is infinite and you just want to get ideas out there. Whereas the business person wants to hold on to their market. And I think that in my experience, people who are spontaneously forming groups are just forming groups because they have something good and they want to share it. And so I don't worry about overtraining. I mean, I think I actually, frankly, worry more about undertraining than overtraining, because I think people get too confident sometimes and say, oh, you know how to do it, goodbye. And in fact, they don't actually know how to do it. But I don't worry about social entrepreneurs holding on to their groups.
Great. Well, we actually do have a couple of questions. First one is from Inigo Ruiz Apilanes. Question is, in our experience, we consider that as important as the process and the maths is for them to learn what is the aim of saving, the roles, the trust, and often they forget about that. However, it is the aim of our charity that members from older groups help to create new groups, and we're training them to do so. So that's really just a comment, but yeah. So besides the technical part, I think is what is being said here. It's really the idea of trust and that people really are in this as something that they're sharing together. That's kind of beyond just the mechanics. So thanks, Inigo, for that. From Nikki Post, what sort of sensitization do you recommend to provide communities / leaders / families on the role for group members forming additional groups outside of their own community?
Well, I think the big motivating factor there is to be able to use groups that are already functioning and to use them as models. We've all seen the power that these groups have, especially when members make it through a full year and get to the end and do the share out. Witnessing share outs is one of the most inspiring things that I've seen in development, because people realize that, well, number one, a lot of them are sort of holding a sum of money larger than they've ever held before. But then they realize that it's a collective action, that they've done all this together. And if you can find ways of communicating that enthusiasm and that sense of accomplishment and that empowerment to others in communities by presenting elements of a methodology and by accompanying the group with these tools, with the manual and the videos that Paul is working on in Zambia, I think it kind of takes care of itself. It's the power of example, the power of success that translate to others.
Yeah, that's good. I think part of the videos that we're planning, there'll be this is also speaking to Inigo's comment, by the way, is that there's the procedures part, but then there's all these other messages part, and they will be separate, so that So for instance, when we talk about savings, we'll say, okay, here's the part about the procedures, how you mark your ledger and how people come up one by one and what the money counters do and all that. So that's the procedures, which is where we've concentrated mostly, I think, in our training is procedures. But then there'll be this other thing about why do you want to save? What's the importance of saving? Like John said, building up to the kind of remarkable surprise that you say, I saved that much money? Wow. And so on. And but then part of this other part, which I'm calling sometimes messages, one of the other messages is, look, if you want to share this, that's great. Our recommendation is that if there's a trainer in your village and you want to have a new group, use the trainer. Use the trainer. But if you're going to, like your maternal village, women get married, they move to a new village and they go back and visit mom, and mom says, what are you up to? And she says, I'm in a savings group. Let me show you how to do it. Which is one of the ways that savings groups have spread. If you're in one of those situations where there's no trainer, people have the videos. What we're going to do, by the way, is have one video for every module in the sort of standard training. And we're not going to show them the video. We're going to give them the video. Say, here, I'm not going to leave until somebody pulls out a smartphone or finds some way that you can keep this video in your group so that if anybody missed the meeting, they can come back and catch up. And if you are unclear on something, you can go back and watch the video and keep all of these. And so when it's time for you to train, there you are. You've got the 9 modules. Start at the beginning, go to the end, make sure people get it. So I think that the way to do it is just to make sure that people have the tools. I'm not encouraging everybody to go out and start forming groups. And I think that the 4 principles that Bill put up on the screen are spot on. Just kind of common sense principles. If you don't have a good group, don't try to train. If you do start to train, make sure you finish, and just make sure you know what you're doing, and have all the training materials you need. So I hope that addresses the question.
Paul, I have a question for you about these tools. One of the things that we've kind of been amazed about over the years is that Hugh Allen on his VSL Associates webpage has the downloadable manuals in at least 3, maybe even 4 languages. And we know that thousands of people have downloaded these, and at least dozens, if not hundreds of people have actually taken the manuals and gone and started their own savings group programs. We don't know exactly how many or how many group members are actually can be linked back to that kind of a download do-it-yourself process. But I'm curious if these tools that you're looking at developing with FSD Zambia, would you see these being available at some point as downloadable and available for people who wanted to go to, Savings Revolution or somewhere else to get access to these tools, and then some kind of feedback system to see how well people are doing in using them?
Well, let's see. That's a good question, Bill. They probably should be somewhere on the list. First of all, let's develop them first, and then we'll talk about this. But
okay,
they probably should be somewhere on the web. But one of the things about putting them on the web, remember, is that they'll be in local languages. So if you have the BIMBA version, you're really looking at maybe a couple of million people at most, who would want to download that. You're going to end up with a mass of different language versions, hopefully, eventually, hopefully in 5 years, there'll be many, many languages. The other thing about that is that people in villages, they don't get their information by going to websites to download things, because that is expensive. There's the bandwidths are low. If you're talking about videos, they're huge files relatively to what you get. It's just, it's expensive, So the way that information gets out to villages is sometimes it might be WhatsApp from village to village, but within a village, people circulate things by Bluetooth, and that just because that's free, and except for the electricity. So I think it's much more likely that the mode of transmission will be Bluetooth rather than downloading from a site. The other thing is, who knows about sites? How are you supposed to find this? You Google it, say, I like training materials. I mean, you and I might do that, but I think the folks out in the village are less likely to do that.
Right, at least now. Okay, I have a question from Mr. G. David Miller. He says, very interesting discussion. It's quite clear that we have successfully built a broad base of savings groups. Question, how well have we worked at the summit, in parentheses, regulatory bodies, banks, ministries of finance, to establish the kind of supportive environment for organized financial behavior within communities that sets groups along the path to financial inclusion? So is there a role for formal bodies to be involved in this process?
Yeah, we've probably not done a lot of this, but there are some examples. I know in Tanzania that savings groups have been included or acknowledged as part of the, I believe it was a microfinance bill or a microfinance law that recognizes the fact that these are effective bodies for teaching savings behavior, for teaching money management, for helping people kind of at the bottom of the pyramid who may not have access or do not want access to more formal structures, and that these are valid ways of going about providing people with access to financial services. Plan had another actually an example in Zambia, where through the Banking on Change project funded by Barclays, we were able to gain access to the central or the Bank of Zambia that was putting together a financial inclusion strategy and was able to get savings groups mentioned as a part of that, and especially as it applies to working with young people. So kind of a first step in getting young people, giving them practice in saving and money management and borrowing and all the things that savings groups do. And then linking groups where possible with formal sector financial institutions. So those are just two examples of where an effort was made to connect with regulatory authorities and to sort of give savings groups a more public stage.
Mm-hmm. Paul, do you have any insight on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of going beyond the webinar topic a bit, but let me just say that, I mean, David, I was struck by your language of studying groups along the path to financial inclusion. That sounds like Mitt Romney saying corporations are people too. I don't think groups need to be financially included. I think because that changes their nature. You know, it's like if the group takes a loan, then well, who's the group? You know, what you get is joint liability and a few people profiting from the loan. At least in the cases I've seen. What I think we want is to have people to have the option of financial inclusion, and because I see groups and the financial system sort of as parallel, very complementary structures. And I would say if somebody, by the way, is saving regularly, borrowing in a group, they're financially included, whatever that means. If financial inclusion means only that they're under this sort of pyramid of formally registered financial institutions with Goldman Sachs at the summit or something like that, then that's fine. But if that's what you mean by it, but it should be financial inclusion means, hey, I've got a place I can save, I've got a place I can borrow.
Right. I guess financial inclusion is defined by who's being included and how they want to be included. So we have a few other questions that have come in. This is from Amina Mutizo. During share-out, most of the group's request for support, during share-out, most of the group's request for support. This leads to some sort of perpetual dependency on the community-based trainers, even when using the HeKid developed to facilitate calculations. So the question becomes, how do we make these groups confident that the calculations they do are right and they need no further verifications?
Hi, Mbina, what a good question. Yes, how do we? And I think that's share-out is the thing that has caused more pain and suffering. We always say groups are easy, but share-out is something that happens once a year, and people forget how to do it. And I agree, they're always calling for help. I do think that this is why I think that having a video very step by step, watch this again. Here's the first step, here's the second step, here's the third step. I hope that we can do that in such a way that is so crystal clear that the groups won't get lost. But this is an hypothesis because we haven't done this yet. But I think you put your finger right on one of the challenges is how do you make share out easy enough that people really can do it without outside help. Mm-hmm. By the way, a lot of the trainers don't know how to do share out. I hate to say this, but if you take a group of 100 village agents from a typical program, How many of them know how to do share out correctly? It's not it's fewer than 100.
That's pretty fascinating. So it could actually become a point of departure for people if the share out's not done properly and people feel like they've been ripped off or something. That could really be have some bad consequences for the group.
I think share out is usually done good enough,
Mm-hmm.
and people, nobody's counting right down to the exact shilling or the franc necessarily, but it is tricky. It is tricky.
So go over to the dark side of savings groups a little bit. Lynn Exton has asked, what have you found are the best practices to protect the savings from theft?
I think the procedures or the transparency that underlies the procedures are the best protection. Now, there are always exceptions where in very, very rare cases that boxes get stolen. We were witness to a situation where a fire actually went through a village and destroyed not the boxes, but destroyed the heat of the fire, destroyed the money inside of 6 boxes. You get examples like that. In cases, and there are countries where theft of boxes seems to be a bit more common. I would say linking with banks and putting your cash the last 3 months of the cycle in a savings account is probably the best way to go. There's no one answer, one answer that fits all situations. But I think that the transparency of the procedures, and then working with financial institutions in extreme environments makes the most sense.
Yeah, I certainly agree. There's no one answer, and even banks. And I would recommend that anybody that has a bank nearby, just why not have a savings account? Now they're usually easy and cheap to open. But I heard of 2 different cases in Uganda, by the way, where all these groups were encouraged to have savings groups, and the banks were fairly far away. In at least 2 cases, in one case, the treasurer was carrying all the money to the bank and never came back. The group just lost their money. In another case, somebody was going to the bank with the money and got hit by robbers. So even banks, can increase risk because if there's transportation. So I just think people have to be smart and think about, okay, let's see, how far is the bank? What are the risks here? What are the risks there? And so banks are great, but not always.
Yeah, and this double-edged sword. On one hand, we want to let people know about savings groups and how good they work. And on the other hand, we don't want people to know that they're savings groups and they have big buckets full of money that people just need to somehow figure out how to steal. So now we have a question from Jordan Bailey. Our biggest challenge is that community leaders or promoters are limited on time to replicate groups. Our current strategy is to pay promoters a nominal amount to support information of new groups. We are based in Baja California Sur, Mexico, and replication does not seem to be part of the culture like other parts of the world. Can anyone talk to this issue of cultural differences as well as the issue of community leaders lacking in time to support replication?
I've never encountered this. This is interesting. I would say that if it's true that this is not, that replication is not part of the culture, and that if community leaders don't have time, that it's probably not worth swimming too hard against the current. And maybe your best option in this instance is to do what you're doing. It's a bit more expensive to be paying promoters to create new groups, but that may be the only option. But maybe it's worth also to look a bit more deeply at the culture and consult with people there and find out if your hypothesis or your observation is really true.
I also know a little bit about Jordan's situation, and I know that the savings groups are it's a very rural area where the concentration of population is very sparse, and which I think is quite different than in a village where there are just a lot of people and they're very close in proximity. So if they see a group operating and they're not a part of it, then they want to be, they might want to be part, particularly if they see positive things happening. So I think it's just, it may not be cultural as much as kind of geographic and demographic, because you just don't have the large numbers of people. I may have that wrong, Jordan, but I think from my understanding of what Philanthropies is doing in Baja, that's the case. Let's see, Pam Escher asked a question. Pam, if you would like to ask that question on mic, I could put your mic on if you just want to put in, yes, I'll ask the question on mic, because you did have your hand up. I didn't see it before. Do you want to ask this question on mic? You can just type in, she says, sorry. No, that's okay. So she says, in response to discussions on how groups can link to financial institutions to lessen the risk of theft, that is why we should encourage linkages between groups and financial institutions using digital financial services and agent networks. Good point, Pam. What do you think, Paul and John? Is a digital financial link one of the ways of solving the theft issue?
I mean, I do all my banking online, and it just depends on what, and it works for me, quick, easy, and affordable. I just think, again, like John said, there's no one right solution. It's so dependent on what services are available, what the level of understanding of people is. I mean, people are used to, like in Kenya, in the M-Pesa culture of Kenya, sure, man, we're ready to move away from cash, but there are countries where that's just not the case. So it's just whatever. I don't share this enthusiasm like we need to put a whole lot of energy into getting people to go digital as soon as possible. It's just something that will happen, and let the people who are making money off of it I would say, let them do the investment in rolling out their products and their networks and their agent networks. So that'll happen. I don't think we need to subsidize it. It's all going to happen. The world is going digital. Mm-hmm. And if it takes 20 years or 15 years or 5 years, whatever, we'll get there.
Yeah, we've got an example in Uganda where adult groups are somewhat reluctant to do this using digital financial services. But when we introduced it to youth groups, it just took off like wildfire. They were very enthused about it, and they do see it as a way of keeping loose cash safe.
So it really is something. It's a curve that we're not on the edge of yet. So we actually had Jerry Johnson answer the questions that we have up on the screen here. So I want to share what Jerry had to say for the first question. Do you ever graduate groups completely? So you have no more contact with them. He says there's always some sort of contact, not frequently as when the group was not yet independent, but they do maintain contact. Number two, are you aware of your group members forming new groups themselves without the help of a trainer? Jerry answers, sure. Some group members start groups in their houses with their spouses, their children, and other relatives. And the third question, do you know how many groups are formed by members themselves in the areas you work? Do you encourage or discourage this, and why? In one community, so this is Jerry's responses, in one community, there have been more than 6 groups formed by members of the groups, and I do encourage that because they apply the training they receive from the first groups in their houses and replicate the learning. That is where we want them to get. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So it's really a family thing, and family groups are spreading it, and it's probably a good way to have people be able to get it right, and if they don't, they're all together and they can keep on solving the problem.
Bill, I'd just be, if Jerry could tell us where he's working, because it seems that there is a strong inclination on the part of families to do this amongst themselves. Be interested to know where that is. Yeah.
So Jerry, you want to let us know where you work? He's going to hopefully type in his answer here. The idea of having people come on mic was not as exciting to people as it was to us. So, but Jerry, if you want to come on mic and talk, you have that option. All right, so we're going to wait for Jerry to reply. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask a question that David Panetta has posed. Do you think that it's necessary for facilitating agencies to set the market standards of giving it all away? Recognizing that trainers' motivations differ and the willingness/capacity of groups to compensate trainers differ, A dynamic marketplace where each group negotiates an agreement with a trainer introduces all sorts of problems. Does the field agent have a moral responsibility to, or I'm sorry, does the facilitating agency have a moral responsibility to set, not enforce the standards? My belief is that even imperfect standards are better than none at all. Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about, David and everybody, is that when people are forming groups spontaneously themselves, okay, to some extent, that is undercutting the market for paid trainers. And very often paid trainers discourage that or try to capture the groups themselves so that they can get paid. And it's partly because of this. I think maybe we've overdone the emphasis on payment as the motivation. I am fairly sure that for most trainers, actually, I do think the trainers need to be compensated if they're forming more than a few groups. But I think that and they've told me this too, they don't work for the money, but they need the money in order to work. In other words, you can't expect people to put in a lot of time, leave their families, leave their children, leave their farms, and buy transportation just out of their pocket. That's just like asking too much. So they end up not doing a good job. But I don't think they're motivated primarily by making money. In most cases, I think they're motivated by service to the community. So I think that just the social entrepreneurs, I think, should get some money. Do we need to set standards for that? Maybe. I'm not convinced, and it'd be pretty hard to do that.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Katie Doyle Myers. Is there evidence of more replication in a particular region if groups are using the HeKid versus oral or paper recording? We're considering adapting the Q Mobile platform for our program in Mexico, but would be more apt to do so if we have confidence that it will help groups replicate more effectively and efficiently.
Perhaps we should say what the HeKid is, just because not everybody understands this.
Good idea.
HeKid is a set of videos that accompanies the e-recording app. So it's designed to train people how to run a group using e-recording. And I just have to say, unfortunately, this has not yet been adequately tested. So I wish I knew. I would love to see some statistics on how well HeKid is working. And I know that some of the early feedback I heard from Kenya, people said, "Oh, I love HeKid. It shows me how to form a group, but I don't get this e-recording thing," which is what it was all about. So
interesting.
Very small sample. Who knows?
Okay. We are getting close to the end of our time. We did run. We started late, so we can run over a little bit if there were more questions. But here we go. We actually have got a new question from Amina. Amina says, due to the cyclic nature of savings groups where everything is shared out at the end of a cycle, financial institutions are a bit restrained in engaging them in a longer term view. This limits the range of interaction that financial institutions have with these savings groups. So the challenge is, how do we structure these groups to have a longer term view while ensuring cohesiveness?
Well, I know that in Uganda, Barclays was actually encouraged by the cyclical nature of savings groups, and actually found an opening for their services at the end of cycles when groups were bringing in the money and needed a safe place to keep it. And at the beginning of cycles, when groups had a need for outside capital to gin up the credit function once again. So I don't know that the cyclical nature of savings groups is a turnoff for financial institutions. But again, whether savings groups should keep their money short term and distribute it, or keep it long term and build up the capital, that's really a decision for the members based on their particular financial goals.
I also think it points to the need for financial institutions to have a real good understanding of how savings groups work in general, and specifically how they work in the area that they're trying to serve. If they have a relationship with groups, they have an understanding of what their financial needs are and what the cycles are, then they can really kind of gear what they're offering for services to what the needs are of groups. If the idea is to make groups adhere to what financial institutions want to do, then that obviously would be the wrong approach. So, there is one more question. We're going to, just for those of you that are paying attention to the clock, we're going to go over by just about 5 minutes. I do have one more quick poll that I would like to ask, but here's a comment by Pam Escher and a question by Masheka Zindula. Pam says, banks find the group savings easy to monitor because they know when the savings will be withdrawn. Also, CARE has done research which shows that groups that are linked to financial institutions save more than groups which are not linked. Interesting. And then Masheka Zindula asks, these are the responses to our questions. I'm going to actually go back to the questions if I can. First question, no, there's still contact as groups are still young. The contact is made possible by the field officer as a member of the community. He is trained and selected among community leaders, and he is more in contact to prepare the handover. Second question, we have encouraged groups to be created with different family members. And third, members from groups created are leading community awareness, and people are calling us for training. There's also some sketch and drama running on radio to raise awareness. We also have experienced some local leaders, both public administration and church leaders, involved in the sensitization. That's great. So using radio, using churches, using kind of a public approach to getting the word out is really, really exciting to hear. So what we're going to do is pop quickly to a poll, which will pop up for you, just to get a sense very quickly of how did this webinar flow for you. This is kind of a different format in some ways than what we've done in the past. Was it too slow? Was it just a bit too slow? Was it about right? Was it a bit too fast or much too fast? Give you a couple seconds to apply to that poll. We really appreciate your great questions and your attentiveness during this webinar. So there's the poll. And do we have answers to the poll? What do we get, Bianca? Because I can't see them.
Sure. So we had 15 people respond to the poll, and 100% said it's about right, and 7% said it was a bit too fast.
Okay, that's great. So we have 107% answering. That's as good a response as we'd ever want to get. So at this point, what I'd like to do is thank everybody again for participating in this. I think this is an important discussion for the savings group field to have. It does intersect with a lot of issues about, how long should INGOs and other promoters be involved in working with communities? How much do communities have the ability to take things themselves and run with them? What can we do to support that process? How does all of this link to the bigger question of formal financial institutions and their entree into the savings group field? And what do we kind of philosophically believe about what the whole purpose of what the savings group movement is all about? I called it a movement. Maybe it's a field, maybe it's an industry, but we're really looking at a discussion that is just going to continue on, and I think in some ways intensifies as we look at expanding savings groups and trying to turn that over as much as possible through kits, through video tools and other things that Paul was talking about, and making this as accessible as possible. John and Paul, do you have any last words?
Only that, as Bill said at the beginning, this is a somewhat new format for these webinars, and actually I felt the most comfortable with this session of any of the ones that we've done, and I really appreciate the engagement of so many of the participants. Thank you for your great questions, and we look forward to doing this sort of thing several more times this year.
Great. Paul?
Just ditto. No, it was. I appreciated the questions, and yeah, it's great. Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks to you guys. Thanks, Paul, for getting up early in the morning. And I do want to let you know that we do have some more webinars upcoming. August 31st, Savings Groups and Advocacy, Lobbying for Change. September 14th, Improving Food Security Through Social Sector Franchising. October 5th, Oral Information Management, New Tools for Financial Inclusion. And November 2nd, Savings Groups as a Facilitator of Education Investments. Now, these are all tentative dates and even titles, but I think we wanted to give you a little warning about this, and just keep on watching our website and you'll see the announcements for these webinars, and also watch for upcoming SMDP training workshops. We are going to be offering our online course, Savings Groups Building Scale and Impact Through Adaptation and Experimentation, as well as training workshops in Kenya, Egypt, and Zambia over the next several months. So please watch those, and we really appreciate your attentiveness, and thank you for joining us, and hope you'll come back. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks for being a part of our webinar today.